Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the session. Lovely to see you all. Very glad that everybody's been able to join. If you are joining from home, then thank you for tuning in. I'm just going to pop the spreadsheets into the chat box again. So anybody that's here live that needs those spreadsheets, they're just on their way into the chat box. If you are using the recording, then of course you'll find the spreadsheet that you're going to be needing in the Google Drive. So today then, our plan is just see how time goes. I'm going to have a look at least 2 of the 3 tasks that I have on the screen here. So a combination of tasks 4, 5 and 7. We'll just see what time allows for. We're working as usual from our revision question pack. And today, because we are tackling possibly tasks 5 and 7, we'll be working also from a spreadsheet. And I'll talk to you about the spreadsheet and the format of the spreadsheet when we get to that relevant task. Now, I did actually want to start with task number 4. Excuse me. And the reason I wanted to start with task number 4 is because I just think it feeds on really nicely from what we did when I saw you in the first session. So if you're watching this session without having looked at tasks 1, 2 and 3, you might like to backtrack and have a look at those as well, because we actually did do some revision when we looked at tasks 1, 2 and 3 about terminology in relation to costs. We looked at a little bit of cost behaviour, the difference between sort of a fixed and a variable cost. We chatted about the difference between direct and indirect costs, that sort of thing. And we're almost picking up with some of that again here in task number 4, which is concerned with overhead absorption rates. So something else that we've also talked about before. So overhead absorption rates, and then the behaviour of costs. So cost behaviour is concerned with understanding what's going to happen to my cost if I do more work, if I produce more units. Or in my case today, what if we had more students in the class? If this was a course that you were paying for, how would that affect the cost structure of the course if more people were to join? That's what we mean by behaviour of costs. So we're going to be looking at overhead absorption rates again, and thinking about the behaviour of costs again. But the way that that tends to be tested within this task is by us producing some sort of budget or extracts from a budget. So if you're joining for the very first time, just know that for each task that we look at, we start off by telling you how many marks it would be in the live assessment, as well as how long you'd actually get to complete it. We also then give you a briefing. And I'm not going to run through all of that now. I think it's excellent for you for revision practice. So if you look at this task with me and think, wow, some of that was a bit over the top of my head, I could really do with sort of having a look at that again in a bit more detail, then use the task briefing. If you're an FI student, you will recognise that this is a sort of set of revision notes put together from our main course materials. And if you're not a student of First Intuition, then this could be an excellent supplement to the materials that you've perhaps got from your own provider. So it runs through the different types of cost behaviour for you and talks about the sorts of things that might be expected in this task. So here is a task for us to practice. The company is Alex, and Alex Limited manufactures bicycles. The question says, here's the requirement here. Different highlighter. Oh, I don't want that one. There. Compare or complete the following table showing the fixed costs, the variable costs, the total costs, and the unit costs at the different levels of production. Enter your figures for the unit costs to 2 decimal places. All of the figures are to the nearest pound. Well, let me make sure I'm very clear about that then. Fixed costs, variable costs, total costs are all to the nearest pound. And the unit costs are to 2 decimal places. Now, it's quite helpful, I think, that in the table here, that's exactly how the first line is completed. So it did say I've got to complete the table at the different levels of production. And here they are. The different levels of production are annotated here down the side of the table. It's not very neat, is it? Try that again. Different levels of production. There we go. So there's 250 units, or maybe 1,000, or maybe 3,750. They're the three different levels of production. And 250 units has been completed for me. And I can see that the fixed cost and the variable cost and the total cost are all to the nearest pound, whereas the unit cost on the end needs to be to 2 decimal places. This one, as it turns out, doesn't need any rounding anyway. We'll wait and see what the others show. Just to be clear, I'm just going to add a couple of decimal places onto there anyway. When something is a whole pound, it doesn't really need its decimal places, but it will be a good reminder to me that I need to think about those with my other lines. Now, I'd just like you to look at the first row for a moment and tell me if you can see, how do we get to that total cost figure? So I've got fixed costs, I've got variable costs. I understand what each of those are. How do I find the total cost figure? Because it doesn't tell me. I've got to be able to work it out. Any thoughts on how we got to that figure? Add the other two together. Absolutely. Add the fixed costs and the variable costs together, and it gives me the total. So when First Intuition deliver a course, we have two components to that course. We have the salary of the person delivering the course. Now, I actually get paid the same whether I have 10 people or 100 people in the class. Doesn't matter to me, it's the same lesson. So I get paid the same. So I would be a fixed cost. But if we have 10 people on the course, we'd need to buy 10 sets of course material. Everybody would receive a folder. That would be 10 folders. But if I have 100 people on the course, that would be 100 folders. So the cost would be greater. The cost will vary according to the number of people that book the course. So to find out the total cost of the course, I just add together the fixed and the variable costs, as we've just seen. And how do I find the unit cost at the end there? Where does that £460 come from? How do we calculate the unit cost? Divide it. Exactly right. So if I know the total cost of my course is £115,000, and I know that there were 250 people that attended that course, I'm able to work out what the cost is per person. And it doesn't matter whether we talk about a course, we could talk about the number of units being made in a factory, we could talk about a party that we're organising. All of these things have fixed and variable costs. Add them together, you've got the total cost, divide it by the number of items, and you get a unit cost. Fantastic. So now you know how that first line is completed. I think it will be much easier for us to complete the next two rows. So looking there at 1,000 units, imagine this was, let's say this was some sort of corporate event. So we're having a big marketing expo, and let's say we've hired a function room, and we're not sure how many people are going to come. Let's say the room holds 5,000. So we can have up to 5,000 people. We know how much we're going to spend if we've got 250 people come in. Will the cost of the room hire change if I have 1,000 people? Will it change if I have 3,750? It's in this column, fixed costs. It's not going to change, is it? The cost of the room is going to be the same. They've given us a room that will accommodate up to 3,000 people, or up to 5,000 people rather. So it doesn't matter how many people come, the room hire is exactly the same. So we spend £50,000 on room hire, irrespective of how many people turn up. Now, in this particular example, they told us the company is Alex, and Alex makes bicycles. So the fixed costs for Alex might be the rent of their premises. They make bicycles. Does the rent go up because they make more bicycles? No, the rent stays exactly the same. The variable costs, though, for Alex would be the cost of making each bicycle. And it will be a different amount of money. If they make 250 bicycles compared with making 1,000, I'd expect that 1,000 would probably cost me 4 times more. than it costs to make 250. So I've got to be a little bit careful how I fill this section in. Can anybody tell me, how might I find the cost of making one bicycle? Looking at that first row, how could I find the cost of one bicycle? Excellent. Yeah. If you know that the total variable cost was 65,000 and you know that was for 250 bicycles, why don't we have a little working down here to find the cost of one? So we'd call that the variable cost per unit. It's the variable cost of one bicycle. And as you rightly said, it's the 65,000 that we spent in total divided by the 250 bicycles that we made. It will give me a cost per bicycle, the cost of one. So £260 per unit, or per bicycle if you like. So now I know that, I'm very well equipped to carry on. One bicycle costs £260. So how much does 1,000 bicycles cost? I think I already saw the answer in the chat box from Michelle. Thank you, Michelle. You took 1,000 units and you said each one costs £260. So that means that I would spend 260,000 on variable costs. Now we know the total cost is the variable and the fixed to be added together. So I could add those together and get 310,000 in there. I'll come to the unit cost at the end. What if I make 3,750 bicycles? What happens now? Well, we know that each one costs £260. So 3,750 of them at £260 each, my cost of bicycles has gone up now to 975,000. So it's jumping up there. Add the 50,000 in rent or fixed costs, and we get to 1,025,000 as my total. And of course, as you work through the question here, you are gathering marks for every box that you get right. So we saw that this particular question is worth 10 marks. The majority are going to come from this first table because there's a lot of work in here, but we're nearly there now. So we're down to the last little section. Let me just put a working reference on here. That was, let's say, working number 1 there to find the £260. So let's have a second working number 2 to find the unit cost. I asked you how we found it before, and you told me you were going to take the total cost divided by the number of units. So we're going to repeat that then. The unit cost is going to be calculated by taking the total cost divided by the units. And I just need to work that through for each of these levels. So £310,000 was spent altogether, and that was spent in order to manufacture 1,000 bicycles. So £310 for each. And then as the volume went up and I made more bicycles, I spent 1,025,000, but I did get 3,750 bicycles out of that. Finally, something that needs a little bit of rounding. So the first one was 200. The first one was already filled in for us. We're now looking at the second one being £310. And then the third row, 273 and 33 pence. So please check that you agree with my workings there. If there's anything that's not clear, please just give me a shout. Oh, okay. Let's see, 1,025,000. Let me just check my maths. 5 by 3, 750. Oh yeah, 273.33. Are you getting 274? Or are you getting the same as me? Is that Linda? Linda, did you get the same as me? Or did you get the 2? Oh, yeah, 273.33. Yes, okay. So if we round to the nearest pound, we'd get 273. Remember what the question said. It said the unit cost had to be to 2 decimal places. So that final column, I wrote at the top of it so I didn't forget, 2 decimal places. All other figures are to the nearest pound, but the unit cost, the last column, was to 2 decimal places. No problem. It's exactly why we practice these things together, isn't it? Because these little things are so easy to mess up under exam pressures. So it's really important that we practice them and get into the habit of making a little note on the workings paper or whatever we need to do to remind ourselves about these little tricks in the question. If I was rounding to the nearest pound, I would have 273, because 273 pounds and 33 pence, the 33 pence makes it nearer to 273 than it does to 274. So 49 pence and less would be to 273. 51 pence and more would round up to 274, and exactly 50 pence in the exam, you could round either way and still get the marks. Okay. Okay, well, my solution says 273. 273.33, doesn't it? So if the actual solution says something different, I will make a note of that and get it changed, because it clearly says 2 decimal places. So I will update the notes for that. Thank you for spotting that for me, Rebecca. We do have to follow the rules in the question. So I'm going to stick with my 273.33. Now, part B. Part B is arguably a little bit more tricky, but let's have a look. Complete the following statement by selecting the appropriate option from the pick list below. We get a separate pick list for each of the gaps 1, 2, and 3. So the first one says that the variable cost per unit, then my pick list is either increases or remains the same at the different levels of output. The variable cost per unit. How much did it cost me to make one bicycle? Do you remember this working? £260 for a bicycle. So one bicycle costs 260. Every single bicycle costs 260. Think about the course. If we sell a course to 10 people, let's say a folder costs £35. If the folder costs £35 and I have one person on the course, I buy one folder, I spend £35. If a second person joins the course, I buy them another folder, that's another £35. A third person joins, that's another folder, another £35. So the cost of each folder stays exactly the same. The cost of the folder is exactly the same, but as I buy more folders, the total cost goes up. And that's what was happening here. It was 260 for each one, but as I bought more, the total cost increased. But the actual cost of each item stays the same. And that's actually the nature of a variable cost. A variable cost is constant. It's a bit like having guests at a wedding. If the cost per head is £40, if you have 50 guests, 50 lots of 40, if you invite another 2 people, you've now got an extra 2 people at the £40 per head. So we just increase at the constant amount. So the answer here is the variable cost of each unit stays the same. Okay. So remember, from the pick list, your options were to increase or remain the same. But we're talking about the cost of a unit, the cost of a bicycle. One bicycle costs the same. It's just that we now have to buy more of them. Okay, so the variable cost per unit remains the same at the different levels of output, but the something per unit decreases. What do you think number 2 might be? The fixed cost, exactly. It can't be the variable cost, can it? Because we've just said that stays the same. It can't possibly be that. So we're saying the fixed cost per unit decreases. We weren't actually asked to calculate the fixed cost per unit, but we know the variable cost of a unit is 260. So if I look at the unit costs over here in my unit cost column, I can see that what's happening is that the variable cost is staying the same. That's £260, whatever happens. But the unit cost is going down the more units that I do. And that's because the fixed cost stays the same and I'm just sharing it over more and more units. So if this was the rent, and the rent is now being shared over 3,750 bicycles instead of just 250, then each bicycle picks up less of the cost. So the fixed cost per unit decreases, and hence the unit cost reduces. We can see that happening. The unit cost is going down all the time. Think about what would happen if you were living in a shared house. You've got the rent, you share it out, let's say between 3 of you, then you get another flatmate. Then the rent's now shared between 4 of you, so you all have to pay a bit less. Then you get a 5th flatmate. The rent goes down some more because you're sharing the same rent amongst more flatmates. That's exactly what happens with the fixed cost. The fixed cost is like the rent, the units are like the flatmates, the cost for each person goes down because there's more of them. So the unit cost also reduces in this case. How does that seem? Any queries or questions on that example? All good? Well, what I would recommend is that you go back to any other task number 4s that you may have from your course materials. If you're with First Intuition, the task bank, that was mock 1. So you could have a look at mock 2 perhaps. Just practice some more task 4s so you get some more exposure to the different styles of question in that area. Right, so we're going to progress to task 5, I think was the next one. Oh, I don't want to be there. What have I done now? Made my page tiny. Okay, so let's progress to task 5. So task 5, it says, is about calculating the cost of products and using basic spreadsheet tools and techniques to improve presentation. So to improve presentation, it might be making something bold, maybe underlining it, putting it in a different colour, making it in italics, these sorts of things. In our task briefing, we have a summary of how to put together a manufacturing account. And I'm not going to run through that with you because it's going to spoil our question. But if you are a little bit rusty on that, please run through that at some point. There you go. That is how we calculate a manufacturing account. We also have a little list for you of the basic spreadsheet functions that you might be asked to use in an assessment. So the sorts of things that you may have to do when we say you have to format cells. What does that mean? What are some of the formatting commands in your assessment? So to format cells, as in words or text, we've got a list of things. And then how might we format our numbers? We also might have to copy and paste cells or insert rows and columns. They're the sorts of things you ought to be familiar with. Now I'm going to use Excel to run through this particular task for us. In your live assessment, it won't be Excel. You are provided with an interactive table, sort of like a spreadsheet. It's embedded in your task, so you don't have to navigate away from the task. You open up task number 5, it's just there. And it's not going to be as sophisticated as Excel. It's only going to have basic functionality. And the best advice I can give you is to have a look at the AAT Learning Portal and have a look at the tasks on there. Have a look at the task 5, have a look at the task 7 and practice them. because that's exactly the same software that will deliver your live assessment. So the nearest you can get to simulating your real assessment will be with the AAT sample assessments. So we're going to use Excel, as I said, and tasks 5 and 7 are in our spreadsheet called Mock Bank. So I'm just going to open up my Mock Bank spreadsheet. I popped this into the chat box, so you should have it. If you haven't got it, don't worry. You don't really need it. You can just watch me working through this one, and I'll make sure that you get sent the recording. So you have an opportunity to watch it again once you have found the spreadsheet and managed to have a go on your own. So what do we know then? Well, this is the manufacturing account for a company called W. Robinson Limited. And the purchase of raw materials for this company is £42,000. So I'm thinking I'm probably going to need to put that in somewhere. Otherwise, why have they told me that? So the purchase of materials is 42,000. You are required to complete the table below. Select the correct options for the cells in column A from the pick lists. Well, I can see in column A, if I just have a look down column A there, there's lots of little green boxes. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Let's go back to where I was, sorry. Okay. So each of these green boxes has a little arrow here because somebody has quite kindly provided us with a pick list. It's got a little pick list for each of the green boxes in column A. My little arrow, get to choose from a list of 5 different possible headings. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to fill in. So 5 to choose from, 5 in the list, 1 for each. So that's selecting the correct option for cells in A. Insert purchase of raw materials into cell B11. B11 then is the purchase of the raw materials. That one we just saw was 42,000. So I'm actually just going to type that straight in. Put 42,000 in there. Calculate all the other missing figures in column B using formulas. And then underline and bold the contents in cell A9. Well, I might just do that now. So I'm right there. That's cell A9, underline and bold. So I want my little U with a line under it, my underline command. You have something very similar in the AAT assessment. And bold is just to the left of it, that big bold letter B. And it highlights as bold when I come next to it. So bold it and underline it, and then that bit's done. I've done that one. And I have done that one. So what next then? Well, I think I should perhaps work on column A, because if I don't know what the different rows are supposed to represent, then I don't think I'm really going to be able to add it up properly. So let me start with understanding what goes where. So this is standard manufacturing account. If you've learnt the format that we've provided you with here, this is a nice question. Of course, if you haven't learnt this yet, this is a prompt that you should go and do that before your assessment. So let's look at our pick list. Let me go back to the pick list there. I've got opening inventory. We're going to be adding purchases. We're going to be deducting the closing inventory, but what will that then give us? Which of those 5 from my list do you think is the right answer for here? I've got cost of goods manufactured, cost of goods sold, I've got direct cost. Oh, I've got direct materials used. Yeah, I can see that Linda's choosing that one, and Rachel too. You are absolutely spot on. It is the direct materials used. And what I think we should probably do is add it up as we go along. That would make sense because we can understand it, talk about it, and we can add it up as we go. So this one, I always think of maybe having a party. And I think about maybe what I've got in terms of my cupboard, in terms of bottles of wine. It would be a bit of a party if I had 10,000 bottles of wine, but let's imagine it's a corporate event. So we've got 10,000 bottles of wine, just as an example. We then buy another 42,000 because it's going to be a big event. So I buy another 42,000 bottles of wine. So I add those on. So now, at the beginning of the event, I've got 52,000 bottles of wine. At the end of the event, I've got 11,000 bottles left. And I think, okay, well, that's good. I've got 11,000 bottles left in the storeroom for the event that's happening next week. But how many then did I use? Well, if I know I started with 52 and I know I've got 11 left, then I can subtract the 11 to get 41,000 for this box here. But the question did actually say I should use formula. So I'm going to have to use a formula rather than just typing in my answer. But in the exam, I think it's very important because there's not many numbers to work with that I do it on the calculator. So I know exactly what I'm expecting. I want my answer to be 41,000. So I'm just going to make a note of that there. And now I just need to make that work with the formula. So I'm going to say equals, and then I'm going to say B10, and I'm going to type it longhand. And the reason I'm going to type it longhand is because that's how I'm going to have to do it in the exam. No shortcuts, just good old-fashioned long way formulas. So B10 plus B11 to add on my purchases, and then minus B12 to deduct the closing inventory. I want that to come out as 41,000, and it does. So I'm happy with that one. And then I've got some direct labour. So what's the next description going to be? I've got direct materials and direct labour. What should I do? What's the next one, do you think? Looking at those options, you've already used materials, so we're down to 4 options. Quite right, yes. You would now choose direct cost. Direct cost is the subtotal of my direct costs. And I've got direct materials, so materials that specifically relate to the production of the unit. I've then got the direct labour, the cost of the staff on the payroll that directly relate to the production of the unit. If I add those things together, I can see that should come to 61,500. That's what I want it to add up to. I don't know, that's what I typed though, is it? That's what I want it to add up to. Let's see if I can make the formula do it. Anybody like to tell me what the formula should be this time? What must I type in here? No, it doesn't, Alison. If it did, I'd be doing it right now. It doesn't. The AAT one will just give you an error, gives you a hazard sign, like warning, not allowed. You can't just click on the cell. It wants you to type in exactly what you're doing. So a little bit of a longer way around, but we do get there in the end. But that's why I've exposed the importance of actually practicing the AAT practice assessments, so you don't find that out on exam day. We now know that in advance. Good. So we've got our direct costs, the subtotal of our materials and labour. We'll then come to the manufacturing overheads. So I've now got the direct cost as being my cumulative total. Manufacturing overheads come next. So what is going to be my next category? I've got 3 to choose from now, haven't I? Cost of goods manufactured. I've got cost of goods sold or manufacturing cost. Does anybody remember which one it is? If you haven't learnt it yet, then there is still time. But you're right. Yes, well done. It is the manufacturing cost comes next. Because I'd say, well, the materials and the labour together are the direct cost. Add on the overheads associated with manufacturing, and that's my manufacturing cost. So those two things added together, I'm expecting to be 111,500. I'm just adding together the direct cost and the manufacturing overheads, but I have to do it with a formula. So do you want to give me the formula again? What are you thinking? So tempting just to click the cell, but we can't. Not in the exam. B15. Yeah, lovely. And then B16. Oh, yeah, that's right. Good. Okay. Yep. Good. So that matches what I did on my calculator or in my head. So I'm on the right track. Then I've then got inventory, some opening inventory and some closing inventory of the work in progress. So I'm now trying to make adjustments for the things that are part finished. I've got some things part finished at the beginning of the period. I've got some things part finished at the end. I've got two categories left. I've got cost of goods sold and cost of goods manufactured. Which one do you think this one's going to be? Manufactured or sold? It's manufactured, isn't it? Because I'm still in the process of making them, aren't I? I'm still dealing with the fact I've got some unmade ones and some part finished ones. So yeah, it's the cost of the goods that have been manufactured. And just like we did with my example about wine in the cupboard for the party or for the conference, what I'm going to do here is say, well, how much did I start with? At the beginning of the period, what did I have that was part finished? 1,500. Okay. What did I add to that? Well, I manufactured goods for 111,500. So add that on. So I've got 1,500 part finished plus the 111,500 that I've then manufactured in the period. Take away the 5,000 that are actually part finished at the end and see what I get. And I just do that on the calculator because I want to see what my answer should be. So then I can focus on the formula to make it happen. So I'm going to take my manufacturing cost, B17. I'm going to add the opening inventory in B18. And I'm going to deduct the closing inventory in B19. And I'm going to hope that comes out to what I got on my calculator, which is on the wrong row there, but 108,000. So I'm happy with that. Excellent. So that does mean that our very final total then, there's only one left to choose from, but that's the one I would have wanted anyway. This is now the cost of goods sold. So anybody that's done any financial accounting will know the cost of goods sold, or the cost of sales, we often call it, is the figure that eventually ends up in our financial accounts. And the method is exactly the same as it was with the other areas. Think about what you're starting with, 49,000 to start with. Add on the 108,000 that has been manufactured in the period and knock off the 47,500 that's left at the end. So the calculator tells me what the answer is, and I just need to prove it with the formula. So I've got B20. I want to add my opening inventory, and I want to deduct my closing inventory. And it does give me the figure that I was hoping for at the end there. Okay, how does that seem?